This is Street Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of I Am Legend. I Am Legend is one of those movies where I don't really remember why I didn't see it when it was in theaters, but quite some time later I ended up watching it when it was released on DVD, and I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed the movie. This is because I'm not the biggest fan of horror movies, like slasher films and those kinds of things. It's not really my thing. But I have found that I like these kind of dystopian future type movies where you have zombies or an apocalypse of some type where, there's commentary on the human condition. And this is such a movie where, in a sense, it's like an end of days kind of movie. Within the film, you have this dystopian future with what I would describe as zombies, but they're like mutants that have come about as a result of this man-made virus, I think it is, right? But within the film, there's exploration of the human condition, humanity. You have Will Smith playing Dr. Robert Neville, who's a scientist. A few years prior, you had a woman who developed what was supposed to be a cure for cancer, a vaccine of some sort. But somehow it ended up having devastating side effects, which essentially killed a large amount of the population and turned them into these mutant zombie kind of things. In a sense, it reminded me of the film World War Z or even The Walking Dead, where there's an illness that becomes widespread and results in people turning into these Walking Dead kind of things, right? Or the undead. With these mass deaths, society breaks down and people are now trying to survive as best as they can. The Walking Dead certainly had these zombies walking about and whatnot. But the main characters pretty quickly find other people who, they kind of form a community of sorts with. But there's conflict because you then have fighting over resources as they're trying to survive. So it's yes, you're trying to avoid the zombies, but you also have to contend with other people who are living and trying to survive, where your group and their group are fighting for resources, territory, things like that. So as part of this thing of survival, you're competing against other living people. The same with World War Z, where you have clusters of people. But here in I Am Legend, it's a little bit different because you have a similar dystopian world with these zombies to avoid. But where I Am Legend differs is that Neville is one of a few million people across the world that turned out to be immune to this disease that is causing people to become these zombie mutant things. And when I say millions, that might sound like a very large number. But keep in mind that the world at present has a population of several billion people, 7 or 8 billion people. Think about it, what the world would look like if that was to drop from 8 billion to 12 million. Keeping in mind that in a place like New York, metro area itself, has a population of about 7 to 8 million people, right? Maybe even 10 million if you take into consideration the suburbs of New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island. You have 14 million people within that radius. And it's sure, New York might be a very populous place, but you have some cities in India and China and wherever else where the population is even more dense. So consider that within the New York metro area, you have 14 million people, and it feels dense because they're packed into a relatively small area. Now imagine that's the world's population and it's spread across the globe. And so at the center of the story, you have Neville, where essentially he's by himself. And I thought it was actually a really nice touch because the story is centered here in America. He's placed in America's most populous city, New York City. And you get a real sense of his isolation, the scale of the city in comparison to the lack of people. Because if he was in some remote area, the impact wouldn't be as noticeable. But for this to be New York, which is a really populous place, I'm from New York, I know how busy and congested it can be. To see it just with nothing moving and how alone he is in a place like New York is incredible. At this point, he's figured out a way to keep the zombies at bay. He has this home that's sort of the safe haven. He has his home base. He's taken precautions where he can be relatively safe. But when he ventures out into the world, he has to be cautious about where he goes, because he can come into contact with these zombie creatures. He has to go out at times to get food, to get resources, as well as to make an effort to connect with other people, right? You see him going into the city, right? Like, he's living in Manhattan. It looks like probably across from Washington Square Park, which is in lower Manhattan by like West 4th Street and whatnot. But he makes forays out into other parts of the city. You see him like driving through Times Square. You see him on the West Side, in Midtown, by like the tunnels to Jersey. And it just gives you like a sense of scale. When you see him in places like Times Square, and he's like the only person there. You see him at the tunnels to Jersey, and he's the only person there, but you can see the aftermath of when people were trying to flee the city. Just rows and rows of vehicles, buses, trucks, cars at an absolute standstill. And it's like, for a place like New York, where realistically real estate is so expensive, you see places that are abandoned in present times that there's no way they would be left empty like that, right? Like, to see weeds growing up out of vehicles gives you an idea of how long they've been parked, that they haven't been moved in some time. And it's like, you see these vehicles parked up, it gives you an idea of like the representation of people, right? Because it's like, if you have all of these vehicles, I would say maybe within the like 15 to 20 minutes of the movie, he's the only person that you see. Granted, they're like flashbacks to before this thing really took hold. You see this woman doing interviews about this treatment she's developed. But really, he's the only person that you see for this part of the movie. It's just him and his dog. And you get a sense of how lonely he is, because it's like he's by himself. He's taken the time to go out into these communities, to like different neighborhoods, and has taken like mannequins and set them up in stores. These are inanimate objects, but he's put these things in place just so he has something to talk to. He's created like these running storylines with them just to have some kind of social interaction, because he really only has this dog to keep him company. And we see how he's bonded with this dog, right? Especially when we look at like the flashbacks of what his life was before this. Him having been married, having a little girl, and then how things unfolded with his family, how it came to be that he was by himself. It really just gives you an idea of how alone he is, the lengths that he goes to not feel so isolated, to kind of mitigate some of that feeling of isolation. It's one of the things that I really enjoy about the movie, that, it would have been enough to make like a movie about zombies and whatnot. And it's one of the things that I think made The Walking Dead really enjoyable early on, World War Z, where sure, there have been zombie movies where, you could just have like constantly shooting the zombies or whatever, trying to kill them, or them trying to kill you. But instead, these projects have like a story about humanity within it. This thing of human beings trying to survive. And in this case with I Am Legend, where you have Neville, this very heavy feeling of loneliness, where it's not just trying to avoid being killed by the zombies, but this thing about him being alone and trying to find some way to connect with someone else. As throughout the movie, every day he goes into the city to, I think, South Street Seaport, to sit on a pier in hopes that someone will come along, which is like a departure from The Walking Dead, right? Because he sends out radio broadcasts every day that he has food, he has resources, and he's willing to share them, all in efforts, all in hopes that he makes a connection with someone else. And so it makes for a really interesting movie. Like, I've watched it before, but I watched it again, this time with a mind towards doing a review. And his sense of isolation really jumped out to me. It made the movie all the more interesting to me. It's like, there's a few close calls where, like he almost loses the dog, he almost loses his life, he gets injured and whatnot. And so you have like these moments of like stress, because it's like, the dog is his companion. If he loses the dog, what else does he have? Like, he talks to these mannequins, but they don't interact with him. He talks to the dog, and at least he can hug and touch the dog. Seeing the ways that within his isolation that he's managed to adapt to this new reality. The different steps that he's taken, safeguarding himself against these zombies, trying to prevent them from getting into the house. This whole routine that he has for going out, and then the routine that he has for coming back in. where it's like, the zombies, they're sensitive to sunlight. So generally speaking, you can be relatively safe within reason during the day, but at night you have to be mindful of them moving about more freely. During the day, you just kind of have to stay out of dark areas. There's like rules to this, where it's not like a free-for-all. Like in The Walking Dead, the zombies are just active all the time. Daytime, nighttime, you just have to kind of be quiet around them to not arouse their attention or to not attract their attention. But it's like here, there's like rules to it. For example, when he comes in at night, he sprays down the steps with what appears to be vinegar or something along those lines so they can't pick up his scent. He has like these metal shutters of sorts that he closes on the window and like on the doors, all in effort to try to keep them out. He's rigged like different types of booby traps, just these various steps that he's taken. And so it's interesting to see. To me, I felt like I like seeing him go through that routine and these like little MacGyver things that he's put together. Those little details helps to add to the story, because it's like, if you think about these fantasy worlds, there's some kind of rules to how things function and operate. And so it's interesting to see within this world, the rules through which he has to maneuver and operate. He has to keep track of like sunset, so he's not out past dark. He makes it a point that when the sun starts setting, that he heads back in. You see this daily habit where before he leaves home, he has breakfast, he sets out his clothes and whatnot. He has this routine. And as part of that is that he'll look at the almanac to see when the sun is going to be setting. He sets his watch according to that to try to make sure that he makes it back in by that time. And you can see that this is so ingrained. It's such a habit that even like the dog gets nervous when the sun starts going down. In one particular case, which makes for a really tense and exciting scene, during one of these forays, he falls into a booby trap that results in him being kept out later than he would usually be, right? Like he's knocked unconscious. And so you have this mounting tension because the sun starts going down. The dog is scared. And it's like, we know that these zombie things are going to start, like they're going to start moving about more freely. And so there's this tension of how's he going to escape from this? And so like those close calls that you have in these kinds of movies where your hero has to find some kind of way to escape ends up being like incredibly exciting. Like you grab your chair arm at the moment, but it adds some excitement. You see him take losses along the way. It's like, I love action movies like this. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of sci-fi or horror movies, but I like smart movies like these where the storyline is more intricate. You have like some exploration of humanity and social issues and whatnot. Like there's a little bit more depth to it rather than just shooting up zombies. And because of that, I find like I Am Legend to just be very enjoyable. It's perfect for Halloween. It's a great summer blockbuster. Definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, it's like I dig these kinds of scary movies. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.